There are moments in life that divide your existence into before and after. For me, that moment came on a Saturday afternoon in the Mojave Desert, when 7 friends drove out for what was supposed to be a simple picnic, and only 5 of us made it back alive. But this isn't just a story about survival. It's about the choices we make when everything is stripped away except the truth of who we really are. It's about discovering that the person you thought you knew best can become a stranger when fear takes hold, and that sometimes the weakest among us carry the strongest hearts. What happened in those 72 hours changed us forever, not because of what we lost, but because of what we learned about sacrifice, about loyalty, and about the thin line between civilization and chaos. They say the desert reveals your true nature. I can tell you now, with absolute certainty, that it does, and some of us didn't like what we saw. The golden hour. The idea seemed perfect when Marcus first suggested it. 7 of us, childhood friends reuniting after college had scattered us across the country, would spend a weekend camping in the Mojave Desert. Nothing extreme, just a chance to reconnect, to remember who we used to be before. Student loans and career ambitions and adult responsibilities made us forget. Marcus had found this spot online, he said, a beautiful valley with rock formations that glowed orange at sunset, far enough from the city to see actual stars, but close enough to civilization that we wouldn't need to be expert survivalists. Just bring tents, food, and good memories. I remember every detail of that Saturday morning. The sun was already hot at 8 a.m. when we loaded up the 2 vehicles. Marcus drove his truck with his girlfriend Ashley and my best friend David. I drove my SUV with my sister Emma, her boyfriend Tyler, and our friend Sarah, who'd just gotten out of a bad relationship and needed this trip more than any of us knew. We were young, we were invincible, we were stupid. That combination would nearly kill us. Emma sat in the passenger seat, 23 years old and fresh out of graduate school, already talking about the teaching position she'd accepted in Portland. She'd be moving in 2 weeks, and this trip was supposed to be our goodbye to the summers we'd spent together, to the version of ourselves that still believed anything was possible. She had her camera around her neck, always documenting everything, always trying to capture moments before they slipped away. I teased her about it as we drove, told her to put the camera down and just live in the moment. She laughed and took a picture of me scowling at the road. I still have that photo. It's the last one where I look truly happy. Tyler and Sarah sat in the back, and I could see in the rearview mirror how Tyler kept checking his phone. Even though we'd all agreed to disconnect for the weekend, he was anxious about something, but none of us pressed him on it. Tyler had always been the cautious one, the planner, the guy who triple-checked everything. His backpack was organized with military precision, with first aid supplies, extra batteries, emergency flares, and enough protein bars to feed us for a week. We joked that he was preparing for the apocalypse. Later, we'd thank God for his paranoia. Sarah was quieter than usual. Her ex-boyfriend had really done a number on her confidence, and she spent most of the drive looking out the window, watching the landscape change from suburban sprawl to empty highway to the vast emptiness of the desert. She'd always been the glue that held our group together in high school, the one who remembered everyone's birthdays, who checked in when someone was struggling, who made everyone feel included. But now she seemed diminished somehow, like she'd forgotten her own worth. Emma kept trying to draw her into conversation, and I could hear my sister's frustration growing when Sarah would only offer one-word responses. The drive took 3 hours. We followed Marcus's truck down Highway 15, then onto smaller roads, then onto dirt paths that didn't appear on any GPS. Marcus kept texting me directions because my navigation had lost signal 20 minutes earlier. "Trust me," his message said, "this place is worth it." The landscape grew more alien with each mile. Towering rock formations rose from the sand like the bones of ancient giants. The sky was so blue it almost hurt to look at, and the heat shimmered off the desert floor in waves that made distant mountains look like mirages. We arrived at the valley around noon. Marcus hadn't lied. It was breathtaking. Red and orange cliffs surrounded a flat area about the size of a football field, with scattered Joshua trees providing minimal shade. There was a sense of timelessness to the place, as if we'd driven back millions of years to when the earth was still deciding what shape it wanted to take. We parked the vehicles side by side and climbed out, stretching legs that had gone stiff from the drive. Ashley immediately started setting up her Instagram shot, directing Marcus to hold a blanket, just so, while she posed against the backdrop of the cliffs. David rolled his eyes at me, and we shared a knowing smile. Some things never changed. Ashley was sweet, but lived her entire life through social media filters. Everything was content. Everything was a post. Everything needed to be documented and validated by strangers on the internet. It drove David crazy, but he never said anything because Marcus was happy. And Marcus had been through enough bad relationship that we all just wanted him to have this one good thing. We spent the afternoon setting up camp. 2 tents went up easily. The third one gave Tyler fits because he insisted on reading the instructions while the rest of us tried to just figure it out by looking at the poles. Emma wandered off with her camera, climbing on rocks to get better angles, and I had to yell at her twice to be careful because the last thing we needed was a twisted ankle in the middle of nowhere. Sarah helped Marcus organize the food supplies, and I noticed how gently he spoke to her, how he seemed to understand that she needed to feel useful, needed to feel like she mattered. By 4 o'clock, we had camp established and the coolers unloaded. We'd brought enough food for 3 days, plus extra water, because Tyler had read somewhere that you need twice as much water in the desert as you think you do. We had steaks for dinner, eggs and bacon for breakfast, sandwiches and snacks for lunch. We had a portable speaker for music, cards for poker, and a bottle of whiskey that David had been saving for a special occasion. Everything was perfect. Everything was exactly as it should be. That's when Marcus suggested we explore. There was this rock formation about 2 miles north, he said, that he'd seen in photos online. It was called the Three Sisters, 3 towering pillars of red stone that stood close together like siblings. The light would be perfect right now, he said. Golden hour, the best time for photos. We could hike up there, watch the sunset, and be back before dark. Easy. Simple. Safe. Tyler hesitated. He wanted to stay and finish setting up camp properly, wanted to organize our supplies and make sure everything was secure. But the rest of us were already energized by the idea, already grabbing water bottles and cameras. Emma was practically bouncing with excitement, talking about how incredible the photos would be. Ashley was already planning her outfit for the Instagram shots. David clapped Tyler on the shoulder and told him to lighten up. We weren't teen danger. We were on an adventure. So all 7 of us set out. We left the tents behind, left most of our supplies behind, took only water and cameras and the certainty that we'd be back in a couple of hours. The sun was still high enough that the heat was oppressive, but Marcus assured us the hike wasn't difficult. Just follow the valley north, he said. You can see the Three Sisters from here. See those 3 dark spots on the horizon? That's where we're going. The hike started easy. The ground was mostly flat, packed sand and scattered rocks. We walked in a loose group, talking and laughing, taking photos of each other against the dramatic landscape. Emma and Ashley bonded over camera settings. David and Marcus debated whether the Lakers would make the playoffs. Tyler walked beside Sarah, and I could hear him trying to make her laugh with terrible jokes. It was working. For the first time all day, I saw Sarah genuinely smile. But the desert is deceptive. What looks flat from a distance is actually full of small hills and hidden ravines. What seems close is actually miles away because there are no familiar reference points, no trees or buildings to give you a sense of scale. After 45 minutes of walking, the Three Sisters didn't look any closer. After an hour, some of us started to get tired. The sun was lower now, painting the rocks in shades of amber and crimson, and it was beautiful. But we were hot, and our water was running low. Marcus kept saying it was just a little further, just over that next ridge, just past those rocks. He'd planned this. He'd researched it. He knew where we were going. We trusted him because Marcus had always been the leader of our group, the one who made things happen, who took charge when the rest of us were indecisive, so we followed. It was David who first noticed something was wrong. He was good with directions, always had been. And he stopped suddenly and looked back the way we'd come. Guys, he said, and something in his voice made us all stop. I can't see the camp anymore. We turned. The valley behind us looked completely different than it had from camp. The rock formations we'd been using as landmarks were hidden behind other formations. Everything looked the same. Red rocks, sandy floor, Joshua trees scattered like sentries, but nothing looked familiar. We'd been so focused on moving forward that we hadn't paid attention to the path behind us. Marcus pulled out his phone. No signal. Of course, no signal. We were in the middle of the Mojave Desert. Tyler's phone was the same. Dead zones extended for miles out here. Ashley started to panic, her breath coming faster. But Marcus put his arm around her and told her it was fine. We just needed to backtrack, follow our footprints in the sand. Except there were no footprints. The desert floor was too hard in most places, and where there was loose sand, the wind had already started to erase our tracks. We stood there in a tight circle, 7 friends who'd been laughing an hour ago, now staring at each other with the first cold fingers of fear touching our spines. "Okay," Tyler said, his voice steady despite the situation. "Okay, we don't panic. We came from the south, so we head south. The sun sets in the west, so we keep it to our right and walk straight. We'll hit the camp or the vehicles or the road eventually." It made sense. It was logical, so we started walking south, trying to stay in a straight line, trying not to let the fear show on our faces. But the desert had other plans. The terrain forced us to detour around ravines and cliff faces. What seemed like a straight line became a zigzag. The sun sank lower, and the temperature dropped fast. It always does in the desert when the sun disappears. We walked for another hour, then another. The beautiful golden light faded to purple twilight, then to the deep blue of approaching night. Stars started to appear, thousands of them, more than I'd ever seen in my life. And they were gorgeous and terrible because they meant it was getting dark and we were still lost. Emma's voice cracked when she asked how much water we had left. Between the 7 of us, maybe 3 bottles. We'd brought enough for a 2-hour round trip, not an all-night survival situation. Tyler started rationing immediately, telling us each person got 3 small sips and no more until we found camp. That's when Ashley broke down. She sat on a rock and started crying, saying she wanted to go home, that this was all Marcus's fault for bringing out here, that we were going to die in the desert because he had to find some stupid Instagram spot. Marcus tried to comfort her, but she pushed him away, and I could see the hurt on his face, the guilt that was already eating at him. Sarah, quiet. Sarah, who'd barely spoken all day, was the one who snapped us back to reality. "Stop it," she said, and her voice had steel in it that I'd never heard before. "Stop fighting, stop crying, stop blaming. We're lost, okay? That's the situation. But we're together, and we're smart, and we're going to figure this out. Tyler, what do we need to do?" Tyler looked surprised that someone was asking him to lead, but he stepped up. "First priority," he said, was shelter and warmth. The desert gets cold at night, below freezing sometimes, and we were all in shorts and t-shirts. Second priority was water. Third priority was getting rescued or finding our way back. We couldn't do anything about rescue until sunrise when someone might notice we hadn't returned, so we needed to focus on surviving the night. We found a small overhang in a cliff face, barely enough room for all 7 of us to huddle together. We gathered what little brush we could find for a fire, but none of us had matches or a lighter. They were all back at camp in the supply bags we'd left behind because this was just supposed to be a short hike. The irony was almost funny. Almost. As full darkness fell, the cold set in hard. We pressed against each other for warmth, sharing body heat, and for the first time in years I felt truly close to these people. Not the superficial closeness of shared memories and group photos, but the raw intimacy of shared vulnerability. We were scared, all of us, and we couldn't hide it anymore. David started telling stories to keep our spirits up, reminding us of the stupid things we'd done as kids. Remember when Marcus tried to impress Jessica Thompson by skateboarding down Miller's Hill and broke his arm in 3 places? Remember when Emma convinced us all to skip school and drive to the beach? We got caught in that rainstorm and had to call our parents to bail us out. The stories made us laugh. Adius, remember who we'd been, made the darkness feel a little less oppressive. But underneath the laughter was the question none of us wanted to ask out loud. What if we didn't make it? What if this wasn't an adventure story with a happy ending? What if this was the beginning of something terrible? Sarah asked if we should pray. None of us were particularly religious, but in that moment, huddled in the dark, with the desert stretching endlessly around us, it seemed like a good idea. We held hands and Emma said a simple prayer, asking for protection, for guidance, for the strength to face whatever was coming. When she finished, I felt Tyler's hand squeeze mine, and I realized he was shaking. Tyler, who was always so calm and prepared, was terrified. We tried to sleep, but it was nearly impossible. The cold bit through our clothes. Every sound made us jump, the scuttle of a lizard, the distant howl of a coyote, the wind whistling through the rocks. Hours crawled by with excruciating slowness. I kept checking my phone even though I knew there was no signal, just wanting to see the time, to know how much longer, until sunrise. Somewhere around what I guessed was 3 a.m. Ashley started shivering uncontrollably. Marcus wrapped himself around her, trying to share his warmth, but she couldn't stop shaking. Hypothermia, Tyler whispered to me. We needed to warm her up, or she could go into shock. We all pressed closer, 7 bodies packed into a space meant for 3, giving Ashley our combined heat. That's when we heard it. A sound that didn't belong, not an animal, not the wind, footsteps, crunching on gravel, coming from the darkness beyond our small shelter. We froze, every muscle locked, every breath stopped. The footsteps came closer, slow, deliberate. And then a voice rough and unfamiliar cut through the night. Well, what do we have here? The price of survival. The beam of a flashlight hit us like a physical blow. We scrambled to our feet, hands raised instinctively, squinting against the light that destroyed our night vision. Behind the flashlight were 2 men, their faces hidden in shadow. The one who'd spoken stepped forward, and as my eyes adjusted I could make out a weathered face, maybe 50 years old, with several days of stubble and eyes that assessed us with unsettling calculation. Lost. Are you? He said, and there was something in his tone that made my skin crawl. Not concern, not kindness, something else, something predatory. Marcus stepped forward, trying to take charge like he always did. Yes, sir, we got separated from our camp. We've been out here for hours. Do you have a phone, or know how to get back to the main road? The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Phone don't work out here, son. And the main road? That's about 15 miles east. Long walk in the dark. He gestured to his companion, a younger man who hadn't said anything, just stood there watching us with an expression I couldn't read. But you're in luck. We got a camp about 2 miles from here. You can rest there, get warm, get some water, head back to civilization in the morning. Relief flooded through our group. We were saved. These men would help us. Everything would be okay. Tyler was already thanking them, and Ashley was crying with gratitude. But something felt wrong. I caught David's eye and saw my own unease reflected there. Why were these men out here in the middle of the night? Why did they have supplies and flashlights when we had nothing? And why did the older man look at us like he was counting inventory? Sarah felt it too. She grabbed Emma's hand and held tight, positioning herself slightly behind me. My sister, usually so bold and adventurous, seemed to sense the danger that hung in the air like smoke. We didn't have much choice, though. We couldn't survive the night where we were, and these men knew the terrain. So we followed them through the darkness, staying close together, walking in nervous silence. The older man, who introduced himself only as Garrett, led the way with confident steps that spoke of deep familiarity with this landscape. His companion, who he called Jake, brought up the rear, ensuring none of us fell behind. Their camp was exactly where Garrett said it would be, tucked into a canyon with high walls on 3 sides. A large fire burned in the center, surrounded by professional camping equipment that looked expensive and well-maintained. A third man sat by the fire, and he stood when he saw us approach. He was older than Garrett, maybe 60, with iron-gray hair and a face that might have been kind once but was now just hard. Found some lost tourist. Cole, Garrett said, and the way he said tourists made it sound like an insult. Cole studied us for a long moment, his gaze lingering on each face. When he looked at Emma and Sarah, something flickered in his expression that made me step protectively in front of my sister. That's so, he said funnily. Well, can't leave folks to freeze in the desert. Sit, warm up. We got water and some food. We sat, grateful for the fire's warmth but increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. These men didn't ask our names, didn't ask how we got lost, didn't offer the usual small talk that strangers exchange. They just watched us with eyes that calculated and assessed and planned. Tyler tried to keep the conversation normal. He asked if they were camping for recreation, if they knew the area well, how often they came out here. Garrett answered in vague terms that revealed nothing. They were out here for work. They'd been coming here for years. They knew the desert better than most. Emma, bless her brave heart, asked directly if they could help us find our camp in the morning. She described the location as best she could, mentioned the rock formations we'd been using as landmarks. Cole and Garrett exchanged a look that I didn't understand, and then Cole said sure, they'd help us at first light. We Were given water, which we drank desperately, and some kind of jerky that tasted like it had been cured with too much salt. The food and water helped, but the tension kept building. Jake hadn't said a single word since we arrived. Just sat on the far side of the fire, sharpening a knife with methodical strokes that set my teeth on edge. Around what I guessed was 5 a.m., Marcus made a mistake. He saw a sat phone clipped to Garrett's belt and asked if we could use it to call for help. Garrett's expression changed. The pretense of hospitality dropped away like a mask, and what remained was cold and hard. "That phone's expensive," Garrett said quietly. "And calls from out here, they cost real money. Money I don't think you kids have." He leaned forward, and in the firelight his face looked demonic. "See, everything out here has a price. The water you drank, that's our water, trucked in from 50 miles away. The fire keeping you warm, that's our firewood, collected and stored. The information you want about getting back, that's our knowledge earned through years in this desert. Everything has a price." The silence that followed was absolute. We understood now. We'd walked into something bad. These weren't good Samaritans. These were men who saw our desperation as opportunity. Marcus tried to negotiate. He had some cash in his wallet back at camp, maybe $200. Tyler had credit cards. We could pay them back once we got to town. But Garrett just laughed. A sound. "D like gravel in a blender. Credit cards don't work in the desert, son. And your money, your phones, your vehicles, they're at your camp, which you don't know how to find, which means you got nothing to bargain with. Nothing except what you got right here, right now." His eyes moved to Emma and Sarah, and the implication was clear. My blood turned to ice. David stood up, fists clenched, ready to fight. But Jake was suddenly behind him with that knife in hand. Cole pulled a gun from somewhere and set it on his knee, not quite pointing at us, but the threat implicit. "Sit down," Cole said, and David sat. Tyler's mind was racing. I could see it in his face. He was trying to find a solution, trying to think of what we had that these men would want that wasn't our bodies or our dignity. And then his expression changed. He reached slowly into his pocket and pulled out his keys. "Our vehicles," he said. "We have 2 vehicles at our camp, good vehicles. My truck is almost new, worth maybe $40,000. Marcus's SUV is worth at least $30. You help us get back, you can have them. Both of them. That's $70,000 worth of vehicles for just showing us the way." Garrett considered this, and I could see the greed warring with whatever darker plans he'd been making. Vehicles were valuable out here, harder to trace than bodies, easier to sell than stolen goods. Cole looked interested too. "The pink slips in the vehicles?" Cole asked. Tyler nodded, lying smoothly. "Gee, love compartments, both of them." It was a good lie because it bought us time. The pink slips were actually at our respective homes, but these men wouldn't know that until we got back to camp. And once we were at camp, with our supplies and our phones and potential witnesses, the balance of power would shift. Garrett and Cole conferred in low voices while we sat frozen by the fire. Jay kept watching us with dead eyes, and I realized that of the 3 men he might be the most dangerous because he didn't seem to feel anything at all. No greed, no lust, no anger, just emptiness. Finally Garrett turned back to us. "Okay, deal. We take you back to your camp. You give us the vehicles and the slips. We all walk away happy. But if you're lying, if those slips aren't there, if you try anything stupid, well, the desert's a big place. People get lost out here all the time. Sometimes they never get found." We nodded, agreeing to anything that would get us away from these men. But we had to wait for daylight. Garrett said he wasn't walking through the desert in the dark, even for $70,000, so we sat by that fire for another 2 hours, 7 terrified friends watching. 3 predators, waiting for the sun to rise and trying not to think about what would happen if our plan didn't work. Sarah started crying, silently, tears running down her face while she stared into the fire. Emma held her hand, and I saw my sister mouth, "It's going to be okay," even though we both knew it might not be. Marcus had his arm around Ashley, who'd gone catatonic with fear. David sat beside me, and when our shoulders touched I felt him shaking with rage or terror or both. As the sky began to lighten from black to deep blue, Cole stood and kicked the dirt over the fire. "Time to go," he said. We stood on legs stiff from hours of sitting, and Garrett gestured for us to walk ahead while the 3 men followed. We were herded like livestock, and the symbolism wasn't lost on any of us. The walk back took an hour. Garrett knew exactly where our camp was, had probably known all along. He'd been out here long enough to know every vehicle that came into this part of the desert, every group of tourists who thought they were adventurous. We'd been marked from the moment we arrived, prey that didn't know it was being hunted. When our camp came into view, still intact with our tents and coolers and vehicles exactly as we'd left them, I felt a surge of hope. We'd made it back. Now we just had to survive the next few minutes. Marcus went to his SUV and made a show of looking in the glove compartment, then turned with an expression of confusion. "It's not here," he said, and I could hear the fear under his words. "I don't understand. I always keep it here." Garrett's face darkened. "You lying to me, boy?" "No. I swear. It's always in the glove compartment. Maybe someone stole it when we were gone. Or maybe I moved it and forgot." Jake moved fast, faster than any of us expected. He had Tyler by the throat before anyone could react. That knife pressed against his neck hard enough to draw a thin line of blood. "No more lies," Jake said, the first words we'd heard from him, and his voice was like ice. "Truth now, or he dies." Tyler, brave Tyler, who'd been trying so hard to save us, closed his eyes and told the truth. "They're at our homes. The slips. We lied. I'm sorry, we just wanted to get back to camp, we thought." He didn't get to finish. Jake threw him to the ground, and Garrett pulled his own knife. "You thought you could con us? You thought we were stupid?" Everything happened very fast after that. Cole raised his gun, pointing it at Marcus. Ashley screamed. Emma grabbed my arm so hard I felt fingernails break skin. David lunged at Cole, trying to tackle him, and the gun went off with a sound like the end of the world. David fell, just dropped like someone had cut his strings. For a moment we all just stared, unable to process what we were seeing, blood spreading across his shirt. David, my best friend since 3rd grade, on the ground and not moving. Sarah started screaming, a sound of pure anguish that cut through the shock. Tyler scrambled to David's side, pressing his hands against the wound, but there was so much blood. Tyler looked up at us with terror in his eyes. "He's hit bad," he said. "He needs a hospital now or he's going to die." Garrett laughed, actually laughed. "Well then I guess he's going to die, because the nearest hospital is 3 hours away, and we sure as hell ain't taking you." Something broke in me then, or maybe something finally appeared that had been missing. I looked at my sister, at Sarah, at Tyler trying desperately to save David, at Marcus and Ashley holding each other in terror, and I realized that being nice, being civilized, being the good guy who followed the rules, that didn't matter anymore. These men were going to kill us all. I caught Tyler's eye and saw the same realization there. We communicated in that wordless way that people do in moments of crisis. He gave the tiniest nod, and then he grabbed the knife that Jake had dropped and threw it to me. I caught it, turned, and drove it into Garrett's leg before he could react. He went down howling and all hell broke loose. Tyler tackled Jake. Marcus, finally finding some courage, grabbed the nearest heavy object, a cooler, and swung it at Cole's gun hand. The gun went flying. Emma ran for the vehicles, screaming for us to get in now. I didn't think. I just reacted, pulled the knife out of Garrett's leg and ran for my SUV. Tyler had David in a fireman's carry, staggering toward us with Jake right behind him. Sarah was already in the vehicle, and Ashley was climbing into the back. Marcus dove into the driver's seat of his truck. Tyler threw David into the back seat, and Sarah caught him, her hands immediately going to the wound, pressing down hard. Tyler jumped in beside them, and I slammed the door and ran around to the driver's side. Through the windshield I could see Cole retrieving his gun, raising it, aiming. I gunned the engine and tires spun in the sand before finding purchase. Bullets hit the side of the vehicle, spider-webbing the back window but not breaking through. Marcus was right behind me, his truck fishtailing as he accelerated. We crashed through the camp, scattering tents and coolers, and then we were on the desert floor, racing back toward the dirt road. I drove like I'd never driven in my life, foot pressed to the floor, one hand on the wheel and one on my phone, desperately trying to get a signal. Behind me, Sarah was sobbing. Tyler was talking to David in a low voice, telling him to stay awake. "Stay with us. We're getting help." It took 20 minutes of driving before my phone showed one bar. I called 911, screaming our location and situation to the operator. She told me to stay on the line, that help was coming, that I needed to find the main road and head toward the town of Baker. I could barely hear her over the sound of my own heart pounding, Marcus followed me the whole way, his truck never more than a few yards from my bumper. We drove like that for an hour, leaving the desert behind, hitting the main road, following signs to civilization. David had stopped responding. Sarah was still pressing on the wound, but her hands were covered in blood, and Tyler had gone quiet in a way that terrified me. We met the ambulance on Highway 15. Paramedics swore. Met the vehicle, pulling David out, working on him with professional efficiency. They put him on a stretcher, started in 4, loaded him into the ambulance. Tyler tried to go with him, but they said family only, and we had to tell them we didn't know if David's family had been contacted. We didn't know anything except that our friend was dying. The police came next. So many questions. What happened? Where were you? Who did this? Can you describe them? Do you know their names? Why didn't you stay at your camp? Why did you go exploring? We answered everything we could, sitting in the back of police cars with shock blankets around our shoulders, watching the sun rise on what should have been the second day of a fun camping trip. They found Garrett and Cole and Jake 6 hours later, arrested them with the evidence we'd provided. The location, the descriptions, the bullet casings at our camp. They found other things too. Other people's belongings, wallets and phones and jewelry from tourists who'd gone missing in the desert over the past 5 years. We'd gotten lucky. Some people hadn't. What the desert teaches. David survived. Barely. The bullet had collapsed his lung and nicked an artery. The doctors said if we'd arrived 10 minutes later, he wouldn't have made it. As it was, he spent 2 weeks in intensive care and another month in recovery. We all took turns sitting with him, reading to him when he was unconscious, holding his hand when he was awake and in pain, pretending be strong when inside we were all falling apart. The trauma counselor the hospital assigned to us said we'd been through an acute stress event, that we'd likely experience PTSD symptoms, that we should expect nightmares and flashbacks and anxiety. She was right about all of it. Tyler couldn't sleep with the lights off for months. Ashley broke up with Marcus because she couldn't look in without remembering that he was the one who'd suggested the hike that nearly killed us. Emma stopped taking pictures, said her camera reminded her of everything we'd lost that day. But Sarah changed in a different way. The quiet, diminished version of herself that had gotten into my car that Saturday morning was gone. In her place was someone stronger. Someone who discovered that when everything was stripped away and survival was the only thing that mattered. She had reserves of courage she'd never known existed. She'd kept David alive with pressure on that wound for over an hour. She'd held him together when his body was trying to give up. And in doing so, she'd found herself again. The trial happened 8 months later. Garrett, Cole, and Jake were charged with attempted murder, kidnapping, assault with a deadly weapon, and a dozen other crimes related to the evidence found at their camp. We all had to testify, had to relive that night on the witness stand while the defendants stared at us with the same dead eyes they'd had in the desert. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, speaking those words out loud, describing what had happened and how it felt and what we thought was going to happen to us. But we did it. All 7 of us stood up and told the truth. And when the jury came back with guilty verdicts on all counts, when the judge sentenced them to life in prison, we held each other and cried, not just from relief, but from the weight of carrying that story for so many months and finally being able to set it down. David's physical recovery took a year, but his emotional recovery is still ongoing. He has a scar on his chest that he'll carry forever. A reminder of how close he came to dying before his 25th birthday. But he also has a perspective that most people our age don't have. He knows exactly how precious life is because he almost lost his. He knows exactly who his real friends are because we all proved it when it mattered most. Emma eventually picked up her camera again, but now she photographs different things. Not posed Instagram shots or carefully composed landscapes, but raw moments of human connection. People hugging, people laughing, people holding hands. She says she spent so long trying to capture perfect moments that she missed the real ones. The desert taught her the difference. Marcus and Ashley didn't make it as a couple, but they stayed friends. The guilt Marcus carried for suggesting that hike nearly destroyed him, but with therapy and time he learned to forgive himself. He learned that sometimes you make decisions with the best intention and they still go terribly wrong, and that doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you human. Tyler still keeps